Brothers and sisters, welcome to this course unit known as Systematic Theology. Systematic theology is one of the branches of Christian theology that are studied in colleges and universities. There is a difference between systematic theology and other academic subjects in a university setting. Unlike other academic subjects, systematic theology helps a Christian to do two things. Number one, analyze theological issues and relate them to the life and witness of the Christian church. And then number two, develop his or her own line of theological argument. By the end of this lecture, you should be able to define the term theology, and number two, locate systematic theology within the context of theology. But what is theology? The word theology is an English word taken from the two Greek words, namely theos, which means God, and logos, which means word or knowledge. In its traditional sense, theology means all that human beings can think and say about God. In the Middle Ages, theology was considered as the queen of all sciences. The English word science comes from a Latin word scientia, which means knowledge of anything. Traditionally, theology has been defined as the science of God and his relation to all things. In modern usage, the word science refers to the knowledge of the physical universe, which knowledge can be arrived at empirically. The disciplined way of thinking and talking about God is what is usually called theology. But remember, you are not the first person to think and talk about God in a disciplined way. There are people who have done so in the past, and they have come up with their own definitions of the word theology. The first person I want you to meet is called Anselm, who defined theology as faith seeking understanding. Anselm said that when you apply reason on the truth of faith, which is found in scriptures and creeds, the result is understanding. The aim of theology, according to Anselm, is to seek to understand the content of faith. The second person is Paul Tillich, who defined theology as the interpretation of the truth of the Christian message for every new generation. According to Tillich, when you think and talk about God, you are required to translate the faith for today through the medium of your experience. Tillich's basic conviction is that the Christian message provides the answers to the questions implied in human existence. The third person is John Macquarie, who defined theology as the study which, through participation in and reflection upon a religious faith, seeks to express the content of this faith in the clearest and most coherent language available. What do you think Macquarie is emphasizing here? He's emphasizing two things. Number one, that theology participates in and speaks from the standpoint of a specific faith, and two, that theology aims at attaining the highest possible degree of intelligibility. The fourth person I want you to meet is Bernard Lenegan, who defines theology as the translation of faith into terms that are intelligible to the wider culture. What do you think Lenegan is saying? He is saying, in simple terms, that number one, theology mediates between a religion and a culture, and two, that its function is to bring to light the significance and value of a religion in any given culture. Lenegan looks at theology no longer as faith-seeking understanding, but as a bridge between a religion and a culture. For Lenegan, although theology's might vary with cultural variations, because theology is context-based, faith itself remains unchanged. Our last definition of theology in this lecture comes from a Latin American theologian by the name of Gustav Gutierrez. Gutierrez defines theology as critical reflection on praxis worked out in light of the world. He uses the term praxis to emphasize the mutual interplay between action and reflection. In this praxis, charity is at the center of the Christian faith. According to Gutierrez, action and reflection, theory and practice, feed into one another in a systematic way, so that praxis can never be mere application of some abstract theory. Gutierrez's emphasis on praxis arose from two sources. First was an awareness of the miserable conditions of the people who were being exploited. Secondly, it was a reaction against the church, which only loved itself and had concentrated on the correct belief and neglected the practical concern of the Christian faith. In conclusion, underlying each of the above definitions of theology is the assumption that, number one, faith and inquiry are inseparable. Two, that theology arises from the freedom and responsibility of the Christian community to inquire about its faith in God. And three, theology is the activity in which Christians reflect upon and express what they have experienced or believed. It is also the effort to say how they arrive at the Christian convictions and why they affirm them. And lastly, insofar as it is reflection, theology is a second-order activity which depends on the experience of God. The disciplined way of thinking and talking about God, therefore, is what is usually called theology.